As local election results flooded in, Durham police made an announcement. They would be investigating Keir Starmer for potential rule breaches when campaigning in local elections last year. The police force said this. Earlier this year, Durham Constabulary carried out an assessment as to whether COVID-19 regulations had been breached at a gathering in Durham City on April the 30th, 2021. At that time, it was concluded that no offence had been established and therefore no further action would be taken. Following the receipt of significant new information over recent days, Durham Constabulary has reviewed that position, and now, following the conclusion of the pre-election period, we can confirm that an investigation into potential breaches of COVID-19 regulations relating to this gathering is now being conducted. Now, pretty big news there. This was how Emily Thornberry responded to the development.
No, there's been a campaign from Conservative MPs in the run-up to this election and supported by a lot of Conservative supporting newspapers to get this investigation reopened, and it's been reopened.
Are you annoyed by it?
No, listen, we will answer any questions that the police have got for us, and we're completely confident that no rules have been broken, so it's fine.
When it says receipt of significant new information of recent days, do you find that intriguing? Do you find that puzzling?
I don't know what that is. So, but you know, we'll be there to answer any questions that they've got.
So you've no idea what that new information could be?
I don't know.
And your view of the original meeting or gathering or whatever you want to call it hasn't changed, has it? Which is that no rules were broken?
Absolutely not. We're absolutely confident that there's nothing to answer here. The police investigated, there was nothing there, and there is nothing there.
Of course, whether or not Starmer broke the rules will hinge on whether his curry and beer could be considered reasonably necessary for work. From surveying social media, legal opinion appears to differ on that question. And in any case, Keir's beer is nowhere near as egregious as Boris Johnson's multiple parties. But the investigation does put Starmer in an awkward position, not least because back in January he said this.
We already know that she's concluded that there's evidence of potential criminal offences. That's why she's passed it to the Metropolitan Police. So we know that much already. We already know that Metropolitan Police have decided that it's serious enough and flagrant enough for them to investigate. It's the worst possible outcome for the Prime Minister. And frankly, some of his cabinet now need to look themselves in the mirror and ask themselves why they're still supporting this Prime Minister. There's a Metropolitan Police investigation into the goings-on in Downing Street, and it's time that some of those cabinet members spoke out and said, we're not tolerating this any longer.
That was Starmer suggesting the mere opening of a Metropolitan Police investigation into Boris Johnson should lead to his resignation. It sounds a little bit awkward now. And of course, Starmer's position will get even more difficult if he is actually fined. This is what he said last month when Johnson and Sunak received their fixed penalty notices.
The guilty men are the Prime Minister and the Chancellor. They've dishonoured all of that sacrifice. They've dishonoured their office. This is the first time in the history of our country that a Prime Minister has been found to be in breach of the law. And then he lied repeatedly to the public about it. Britain deserves better. They have to go.
Remember, Rishi Sunak was fined for just attending a meeting where Boris Johnson was presented with a birthday cake. It was against the law, but it's hardly any more egregious than a shared beer and curry during an election campaign. Aaron, how big a problem do you think this police investigation is for Keir Starmer?
Understatement of the year, it's a big problem, Michael. He's saying, his account is that this was a work event, they ordered a curry, this was eaten at around 10 p.m, they had a beer, and then they went back to work. Hard to believe, and I think during this investigation, they're going to have to submit evidence of the fact that they did go back to work. And if they can show emails and some kind of documentation or evidence demonstrating that they were working after that time, maybe they'll be okay. But it does seem strange that on a Friday night at 10 p.m. after a curry and a beer, you then go back to work. I think many people find that a bit strange. However, there are whispers that it's worse than that. You know, I've heard 11 p.m. I've seen evidence from somebody that, you know, there was music, that there was a buffet. Now, anybody can claim anything, and that's the point of the investigation. But it does mean that there are questions to be asked. And even from what we know, with the 10 p.m. curry, no music, if they didn't go back to work after having that meal and that beer, then I qualitatively don't see any difference between what Keir Starmer did and what Rishi Sunak did. I don't. And I know that's a deeply unpopular thing to say on Twitter, for the Starmeristas, the Starmeroids, but that's just trying to be objective and fair and balanced. I don't think that Starmer did anything that Rishi Sunak did. And he's called on Rishi Sunak to resign. I think if Starmer had simply called on Boris Johnson to resign, he'd be on much firmer ground here. But the truth is, he demanded the resignation of the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And from what I can see, best case scenario for him, he's as guilty. So I don't see how he's got a leg to stand on. In terms of him being retrospectively fined, that's not the policy of police in Durham. So it seems quite difficult that he will be fined. However, if he's not fined and then people in Downing Street are fined, I think that's going to create a great deal of political tension. And I think the Tories will also use that to their advantage and say, look, we've been pilloried and treated unfairly, and Keir Starmer's been able to get away with it. So whether or not he's fined, I don't think really matters in terms of the broader politics. I think if he is fined, which I don't think is going to happen, I think he would have to resign. Of course he would. But I think regardless of what happens, purely as a result of this investigation, there are major political consequences for him, in so much as it now nullifies this line of attack, which he's been pursuing for months. And if he's found guilty to have broken the rules, I think he's discredited as a politician to an extraordinary extent. The attack line that they've had on Johnson for months is he's a man of no integrity, he's not honest. If Starmer's found guilty of breaking the rules, that disintegrates.
Labour could come out and say, look, we'll let the police do their investigation. Actually, I think he could get a fixed penalty notice, because you've got to remember the Metropolitan Police, their original position was we don't investigate sort of retrospective rule breaches. Then they changed their mind because they said, oh, actually, when there's a case which is undermining people's confidence in the rule of law, we'll reopen it. I imagine Durham can use exactly the same logic. When there is a case which we feel like it could undermine sort of faith in the rule of law, we will reopen it. And I think if they're opening an investigation, they won't have already presumed they won't be issuing the fine. Otherwise, why bother reopening it? But I think what's so difficult about this is Labour could come out and say, look, whether or not he broke the rules, obviously he will be incredibly sorry if he did, and he'll be very frank and open about this. What Keir Starmer did, every reasonable person sort of looking at what has taken place can assess that what Keir Starmer did, even if it was wrong, and he'll be very sorry for that, it's a different kettle of fish. It's completely different to what Boris Johnson did, which was repeated rule breaches, often with up to 100 people invited to a party. This was not these were not accidental breaches. These it might be accidental, but they weren't incidental. They were systematic, right? Different timescales. We talked about this before. Some of those rule breaches in Downing Street were in that first lockdown, when there really was a different atmosphere, a different feeling, and a different approach to people who broke the laws. Those posters, when it said, have you bent the rules? Essentially the implication was, have you bent the rules? You might have killed someone. That was when they were bending the rules in Downing Street. So I think that there are a lot of things that Labour could come out to say what Keir Starmer has done is completely different to what Boris Johnson has done. The problem is precisely what were in those clips which I showed you, which is Keir Starmer saying the mere fact of the police opening an investigation is incredibly damning for Boris Johnson and should lead to his resignation and should lead to Conservative MPs to step up and get rid of him. And then saying about Rishi Sunak, the mere fact of the police issuing a fine, even though in the case of Rishi Sunak, which was just turning up to a meeting where there was a cake, it's not particularly egregious. He said that mere fact should lead to his resignation. So it's going to be very, very difficult for Keir Starmer to not do the same. And there have already been pretty awkward conversations and interviews today. Yvette Cooper, I heard interviewed on The World at 1. I actually didn't think the host pushed as much as he could have done. But he was basically saying, if Keir Starmer is fined, should he resign? And she said, we don't think he will be fined because, we don't think he broke the rules. Now, the host could have pushed there and said, well, you've been asking these hypothetical questions of the Conservatives all the time. If Boris Johnson is fined, will he resign? And now we're asking you these questions about yourselves and you're refusing to answer. And I suppose, finally, the one other response that Keir Starmer has had is, look, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis. Why are we talking about this tittle-tattle? And that doesn't work when he's repeatedly stood up in Prime Minister's question and called for Boris Johnson and Rishi Sunak to resign because of fines. You can't then suddenly change the rules and say, actually, I'm only interested in substantive policy, which is why, as I say, his rule breach is not the same as Boris Johnson's, but due to how he has approached Partygate, he's undeniably in a very difficult situation right now.
Totally, Michael. And I just want to reiterate, I'm in no way comparing what he's done to Boris Johnson. I think the analogy to Rishi Sunak is probably quite fair, but I think broadly speaking, what happened in Downing Street is extraordinary. And I don't see how only Allegra Stratton is the only person that's been punished for it. I find that just unthinkable. I don't know how they've gotten away with that. But the problem for Starmer is, and it's embodied in those video clips you shared earlier, is that he has tried to present himself as a moral crusader, as somebody who is, I'm the former director of public prosecutions. I'm incredibly ethical and moral, in complete counterpoint and contrast to the Prime Minister. Boris Johnson has never claimed to be an honest, good man, right? So, of course, this is terrible for his political brand because of COVID and the sacrifice that everybody made, and he didn't adhere to it. But I don't think anybody's particularly surprised. I think they're shocked at the extent of it. But Boris Johnson broke the rules when it came to the lockdown. People go, yeah, I really could see that coming. But when you're trying to construct this kind of brand of Keir Starmer as the lawman, as the barrister, as the ethical conscience of the public against this deviant Tory who is just a rule breaker and is shameless, that loses its edge. For me, it's a bit like, say, Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn is saying, I'm a socialist and I believe in redistribution. And then you find out he wears Armani suits, drives a Ferrari, and has a £10,000 watch. People would say, well, this guy's not very credible. He's making excellent points about policy, but he clearly doesn't live up to the things that he expects of others. He's pontificating. He's two-faced. He's hypocritical. That's the exact problem now facing Keir Starmer.